They sent an ultimatum. We offered a choice. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the TEF Stellaris, her form a silhouette against the swirling star map of the Xylos system. Before them hung the Praxian fleet, a rigid formation of gunmetal gray angles and unapologetic power. Their ultimatum was a slash of crimson text superimposed over the main view screen, stark and absolute. Surrender the colony of Xylos and its 5 million inhabitants, or witness its systematic disassembly. The timer beneath the demand pulsed with quiet menace 2 hours, 59 minutes, 41 seconds. Lyceum status of the Praxian Mandate Fleet Rostova said, her voice a calm counterpoint to the tension coiling in the air. The ship's integrated fleet mind Lyceum replied instantly, its synthesized voice smooth as chilled mercury. Their disposition remains unchanged, Admiral. 27 capital ships holding a stable energy blockade at the system's primary gravity well. They are broadcasting their ultimatum on all civilian and military channels. The console beside her shimmered, displaying the enemy fleet's precise vectors and weapon readiness. The low hum of the vessel's inertial dampeners was a constant grounding presence. Her tactical officer, Commander Jian Li, traced a finger over her own console. Their formation is textbook mandate doctrine. A wall of focused energy projectors designed for overwhelming orbital bombardment. They expect us to break ourselves against it. Rostova nodded, her gaze fixed on the crimson numbers bleeding away the seconds. The Praxians never negotiated. Their history was a long, dark ledger of compliance bought with planetary ruin. They saw ultimatums not as a tool of diplomacy, but as the only valid form of interstellar communication. We came to teach a different language. Inside a cramped medical bay aboard the civilian transport, Starlight Wanderer, a young girl pressed her face against the viewport, her breath fogging the cold plasteel. She watched the distant, menacing shapes of the Praxian ships. "Mama, are the bad men going to hurt us?" she whispered, her small hands clutching a worn synthcloth doll. Her mother knelt beside her, pulling a thin blanket tighter around her daughter's shoulders. "There are helpers on the way," she murmured, her voice strained but steady. "They will be here soon. You just watch for the new stars." Rostova's eyes flickered to a secondary display, showing the convoy of civilian transports huddled behind Xylos's moon. They were packed with refugees, families who had believed the Praxian hegemony's promises of stability. Lyceum run final simulations on Operation Mirror Shade. Focus on lattice integrity under sustained fire. The AI's voice emanated from the air itself. "Simulations complete, Admiral. The drone lattice maintains 94% reflective efficiency for 12 minutes under projected assault patterns. After that, cascade failure becomes unavoidable." A vibration ran through the deck plating as the Stellaris adjusted its position, a deep thrum of immense power held in check. 12 minutes is a generous window, Jian commented, her expression tight. "But it assumes they react predictably." Rostova's lips formed a thin line. "The mandate's greatest strength is its unwavering doctrine. It is also its most exploitable weakness." She activated the fleet-wide channel, her voice resonating with a quiet authority that belied the immense pressure of the countdown. "All elements prepare to deploy the lattice. We are not here to shatter their wall. We are here to show them their own reflection. They built a cage of light. We gave them the key. Thousands of drones, no larger than coffins, streamed from the launch bays of the Terran fleet. They were simple things, really a basic thruster package, a navigational brain, and a perfectly polished, hyper-dense mirror. They moved without haste, assembling into a vast, intricate pattern between the human ships and the Praxian blockade. The formation was not a shield wall, but a delicate, shimmering net, a lattice of impossible geometry, catching the light of the distant star. It was beautiful, ethereal, and utterly defiant. On the bridge of the Praxian flagship, The unquestionable mandate subjugator Kalen watched the strange deployment with contempt. His bridge was stark functional and bathed in the harsh red glow of combat alerts. "What is this foolishness?" he sneered, his voice grating like stone on steel. "A light show, do they think, to dazzle us into submission?" His tactical officer leaned forward, adjusting a sensor feed. "Energy readings are minimal subjugator. They are simple reflective surfaces. No weapons, no shields." Kalen's lip curled, a gesture of futility, a final pathetic display before their inevitable compliance. He held up a hand, silencing the low chatter of his crew. "Hold fire. Let them complete their little art project. The galaxy must see that defiance, no matter how creative, has only one conclusion." His doctrine was a simple and brutal equation. Overwhelming force applied without hesitation created stability. Mercy was a bug in the code of the universe, a flaw the Praxians had corrected. The countdown on his screen ticked past the 2-hour mark. They thought their power was absolute. Aboard the Terran cruiser, Balance, a young ensign, monitored the civilian convoy's comms. His brow furrowed in concentration. He heard snippets of prayers, frightened whispers, the low hum of life support systems, straining to remain unnoticed. He keyed his internal calm. "Commander Lee, a priority message from the convoy leader. They are asking for an update. Their life support is beginning to fluctuate." Jian's voice came back instantly, crisp and professional. "Tell them to hold their course and trust the light ensign. The Admiral's plan is in motion." The hiss of recycled air filled the brief silence that followed, a reminder of the fragile bubble of life they were all sworn to protect. Rostova watched the lattice finalize its configuration. It was a masterpiece of orbital mechanics, a web of calculated angles and precise positioning. Lyceum confirm all mirror nodes are aligned and networked. The AI responded without inflection. "All 12 500 nodes are in optimal position, Admiral. They are slaved to my targeting protocols capable of microsecond adjustments to their facing." Rostova took a deep breath, the faint scent of ozone from the tactical display tickling her nostrils. "Commander Lee, open a dedicated channel to the Praxian flagship. No encryption. Let the whole system hear it." Jian's fingers flew across her console. "Channel open, Admiral." Rostova stepped forward until her reflection was a faint ghost on the view screen superimposed over the enemy fleet. "Subjugator Kalen, this is Admiral Eva Rostova of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. You have issued an ultimatum to 5 million civilians. This is a violation of the Galactic Accords on proportional response. A debt was owed, and the ledger was open." Kalen's face appeared on a secondary screen, his features sharp and cruel. A sneer was etched permanently into his face. "The Accords are for equals, Admiral. We are the architects of order. Those who defy the mandate are not victims. They are obstructions. Your posturing is noted and dismissed. You have 1 hour and 48 minutes to signal your compliance." He motioned off-screen, and the transmission cut. The console glare cast long shadows across Rostova's face. "His arrogance is predictable," Jian said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He won't even consider an alternative." Rostova's gaze was unyielding. "He doesn't have to. We are going to provide him with one." She turned to her helm officer. "Lieutenant, bring us forward. Slow approach, single-file formation. Make it look like a final desperate plea for negotiation." The deck vibrated gently as the Stellaris and its sister ships began to move, a slow, deliberate procession toward the shimmering lattice and the wall of Praxian might. The Praxians watched their weapon ports glowing with contained energy. They saw a small fleet, a fraction of their size, inching forward in a formation of supplication. It was exactly what their doctrine predicted. A lesser power faced with an immovable object would first posture, then plead, then break. It was the natural order of things, the foundational truth upon which their hegemony was built. They saw weakness. We showed them a fulcrum. The human fleet glided into position directly behind the intricate web of mirrors. From the Praxian perspective, the Terran ships were now partially obscured, visible only through the gaps in the strange, glittering net. The countdown continued its silent, inexorable march, 1 hour 30 minutes. Kalen leaned back in his command chair, a picture of smug satisfaction. Their nerve is failing. Prepare to receive their surrender, but no surrender came. Instead, the civilian transports behind Xylos's moon began to move, not toward the Praxian fleet, but away, angling for a pre-calculated jump point at the system's edge. They were slow, vulnerable, and utterly exposed. Subjugator, the civilian ships are attempting to flee, his tactical officer reported, his voice sharp with alarm. Kalen slammed his fist on the armrest. Insolence, teach them the price of hope. Forward batteries fire a warning shot across their bow, a single high-energy beam. Let them see the power they defy. A lance of pure, white-hot energy erupted from the unquestionable mandate. It was a demonstration, a casual flick of the wrist from a giant. The beam screamed across the void, aimed not to hit, but to terrify. It sliced through the space where the convoy would be, in moments, a brilliant line of instant annihilation. The beam passed harmlessly through the outer edge of the Terran mirror lattice. Then the universe folded. For a microsecond, nothing happened. The energy beam traveled on its intended path. But Lyceum's calculations were faster than light, faster than thought. In that infinitesimal slice of time, 3,000 mirror drones on the edge of the lattice pivoted, not by degrees, but by fractions of a degree. It was a movement so small, so precise, it was undetectable. But it was enough. The Praxian warning shot, a weapon of terror, hit the first rank of mirrors. It did not splash or detonate. It was caught, redirected, and passed on. From one mirror to the next, the beam was funneled, focused, and bent, its trajectory warped in a silent geometric ballet. It entered the lattice as a broad warning shot and exited as a surgical scalpel of focused light, its energy multiplied 100-fold. It painted a new path across the stars, a path leading directly back to its source. The beam struck the Praxian cruiser Iron Will, one of the key blockade ships. It didn't hit the command bridge or the reactor core. It sliced cleanly through the vessel's primary energy conduits, the very arteries that powered its weapons. The Praxian ship didn't explode. It simply went dark, its lights flickering out, its weapon ports dimming to a dull, lifeless gray. It was neutralized, silenced, rendered impotent by its own power. Their sword became their shackle. Silence reigned on the Praxian bridge. The crew stared in disbelief at the tactical display. The Iron Will was still there, its crew alive, but it was a dead ship in the water. Kalen shot to his feet, his face a mask of fury and confusion. "What was that report?" His officer's voice trembled. "Subjugator." They reflected our own beam back at us. The trajectory was perfect. Impossible. The console behind him beeped frantically, updating with new data. The civilian convoy, under the cover of the confusion, had accelerated their path to the jump point, now clear. Rostova watched the disabled Praxian cruiser, her expression grim but resolute. There was no celebration on her bridge, only the quiet focus of a surgeon who had made a necessary incision. Lyceum damage assessment. The AI's voice was placid. Praxian cruiser Iron Will has suffered a complete power failure to its primary weapon and propulsion systems. Life support appears intact. Casualties are estimated to be minimal. The blockade has a hole. One down, Jian breathed, her knuckles white where she gripped her console. They won't make that mistake again. Rostova nodded. No, they won't. Now they will simply try to overwhelm the lattice. She was right. A wave of fury washed over the Praxian command net. They had been tricked, made to look foolish. Their doctrine had no chapter for this. An ultimatum was a statement of fact, not an opening for debate. Their anger was a hammer. We were the anvil. Aboard the Stellaris, the deck began to thrum with a new, more intense vibration. The ship's heat sinks began to glow with a faint cherry-red aura. The Praxians are rerouting power to all forward batteries, Lyceum announced calmly. They intend to saturate the area to brute force the destruction of the mirror lattice. 26 ships are preparing to fire simultaneously. The scent of hot metal and ozone grew stronger in the recycled air. Rostova's command was instantaneous. All fleet assets brace for impact. Lyceum execute Cascade Requiem. Prioritize convoy safety. Settle the account. The next Praxian salvo was not a single beam, but a storm. A wall of incandescent energy wide enough to vaporize a small moon roared toward the Terran fleet. It was the physical manifestation of Praxian rage, an unsubtle, overwhelming force designed to erase the insult. The lattice, that beautiful, intricate web of mirrors, met the storm head-on. For a glorious, terrible moment it held. The entire lattice blazed with impossible light, a man-made star born in the void. It caught the deluge of energy and for a few precious seconds tried to tame it. Beams were redirected, scattered, bent back toward the Praxian line in chaotic, unpredictable vectors. 2 more Praxian ships suffered minor system failures as their own wild shots were flung back at them. But the lattice was dying. The mirrors, unable to handle the sheer energy load, began to vaporize, turning from perfect reflectors into clouds of incandescent plasma. The cost of defiance is paid in fire. The 12-minute window Lyceum had calculated was closing fast. On the bridge of the Stellaris consoles flickered as stray energy bursts washed over their shields. A power conduit overloaded somewhere deep in the ship's engineering section, and the lights dimmed for a half-second before emergency backups kicked in. The hull groaned a deep, resonant sound of stressed metal. Shields at 88%, Gian called out, her voice steady, despite the shudder that ran through the deck. The convoy is 10 seconds from the jump point. Rostova watched the lattice die, its nodes winking out of existence one by one. It had done its job. It had bought time, traded itself for the lives of thousands. The civilian transports, their engines blazing at maximum thrust, vanished in a series of silent cerulean flashes as they entered hyperspace. They were safe. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the Terran bridge crew, a release of tension so palpable it was almost a sound. But the battle was not over. The Praxian fleet, enraged, and now unobstructed, began to advance. Their wall of energy weapons was gone, but now they were a fleet of warships moving to engage at closer range. They had been bloodied, embarrassed, and their doctrine demanded a reckoning. The crimson timer on the main screen was forgotten, replaced by the hard reality of an imminent fleet engagement. A tally was written in light and shadow. Subjugator, the civilian transports, have escaped, the Praxian tactical officer reported, his voice flat with the finality of the news. Kalen's face was a thundercloud. He stared at the empty space where the convoy had been then, at the approaching Terran ships. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and their trick with the mirrors was spent. They have made their choice, he hissed, the words dripping with venom. They chose defiance. Now they will receive its reward. All ships advance and engage. Erase them from this system. The Praxian fleet surged forward, breaking their rigid formation and becoming a swarm of hungry predators. Missiles streaked across the void, and plasma cannons began to spit balls of incandescent fury. The space between the two fleets became a lethal garden of blossoming explosions and crisscrossing energy beams. This was the fight the Praxians understood, the one their entire military culture was built around. Brute force against brute force. On the Terran bridge, the atmosphere was electric. Enemy missile launch detected multiple vectors, Lyceum announced. Deploying countermeasures. Point defense cannons are engaging. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time, as a plasma bolt impacted the forward shields. The air grew warmer, and the low hum of the ship's systems rose in pitch. They demanded a surrender. We prepared for a reckoning. Inside the engine room of the TEF Resolute Chief Engineer Anya Sharma clung to a support rail as the ship bucked. Red warning lights flashed across her console. Hull plating in Section 7 is compromised. Minor plasma bleed-through. I need a damage control team there now. Her crew, disciplined and focused, moved with practiced efficiency, sealing bulkheads and rerouting power. The smell of burning insulation filled the air, a testament to the violence unfolding outside. They were holding, but the cost was being measured in scorched metal and spent energy. Admiral, the enemy is attempting to flank us. Jian reported, her fingers a blur as she updated the tactical display. They are trying to get behind our shield envelope. The 3D map showed Praxian destroyers moving in wide, sweeping arcs, trying to encircle the smaller Terran fleet. It was a standard tactic, competent and dangerous. Rostova's eyes narrowed. The Praxians were reacting exactly as Lyceum's behavioral models had predicted. They were angry, overconfident, and falling back on doctrine. Lyceum, Rostova said, her voice cutting through the rising din of battle. They believe we are trapped between their fleet and the planet. They think our only options are to fight a losing battle or retreat into the gravity well. The AI's synthesized tone was unruffled. That is a 98.7% accurate assessment of their tactical assumption, Admiral. Rostova allowed a ghost of a smile to touch her lips. Then it's time to introduce them to Option 3. Signal the fleet. Execute Operation Unseen Fulcrum. They thought the board was set. We were playing a different game. Kalen watched the Terran fleet give ground. They were falling back toward the planet Xylos, their movements coordinated, but clearly defensive. Their fire was becoming sporadic as they struggled to manage shield power and return volleys. Victory was inevitable. It was simply a matter of applying sufficient pressure. Push them harder, he commanded. Break their formation. I want their admiral's command codes as a trophy. The Terran fleet continued its slow fighting retreat. They seemed to be drawing a line in space, a perimeter they were unwilling to cross. This too fit Praxian battle doctrine. A cornered foe would establish a last stand. Kalen's fleet tightened its embrace, moving in for the kill. They crossed a specific set of coordinates in space, the very coordinates the civilian convoy had so conspicuously fled from just minutes before. And then Lyceum spoke not just to the Terran fleet, but on an open, system-wide channel. Its voice was calm, clear, and utterly devastating. Phase 2 initiated, activating the system's primary mass driver. Deep within the asteroid belt that ringed the outer Xylos system, something immense began to move. It was a mining installation, a civilian facility designed to launch mineral-rich asteroids toward the system's industrial heart. For the last 24 hours, under Lyceum's remote guidance, it had been doing something else. It had been loading the system's largest mass driver with the 10 most massive iron core asteroids it could find. The galaxy holds its breath for the fall of the hammer. It was not a weapon. It was a piece of industrial equipment. But when you are moving 1 million tons of iron at a significant fraction of the speed of light, the distinction becomes academic. The first asteroid, pre-launched and perfectly timed, screamed out of the asteroid belt. It wasn't aimed at the Praxian fleet. It was aimed at a precise point in space just ahead of them. When it reached that point, a single Terran missile fired seconds earlier met it. The missile was not a warhead. It was a kinetic impactor. The asteroid shattered. It did not explode. It became a cloud. A shotgun blast of nickel-iron shrapnel the size of city blocks moving at incredible velocity filled the exact corridor of space the Praxian fleet was now occupying. It was a trap not of energy, but of simple, brutal physics. The Praxians' shields designed to stop energy beams and plasma bolts were suddenly faced with a storm of solid matter. The result was carnage. Praxian ships that had been sleek predators moments before were now being shredded. Hulls were punctured, engines were smashed, and command decks were ripped open to the void. The soundless violence was horrifying in its efficiency. It was not a battle. It was an industrial accident on a planetary scale. Their doctrine was a wall. The universe did not care. On the bridge of the unquestionable mandate, chaos erupted. The ship shuddered as a fragment the size of a freight hauler slammed into its port side, peeling away armor plating like foil. Alarms blared a discordant symphony of failure. "Report," Kalen bellowed, clinging to his command chair to stay upright. "What is happening?" His tactical officer, his face pale with shock, stared at the sensor readings. "It's the asteroids from the mining belt. They're being thrown at us. Our point defense systems are overwhelmed." Rostova's bridge was quiet. The crew watched the unfolding destruction with grim satisfaction. This was the trap, the unseen fulcrum she had planned all along. The mirror lattice was a distraction, a clever piece of misdirection to force the Praxians into a predictable path of aggression. The real weapon was their own arrogance. Their doctrine demanded they push forward to press any advantage. She had simply made sure their path led directly into a place where the universe itself would become their executioner. "Lyceum status update," she ordered, her voice low. 14 Praxian vessels have sustained critical damage. 5 are no longer reporting. The remaining fleet is in disarray. They are attempting to reverse course, but their momentum is carrying them deeper into the debris field. Another asteroid, perfectly timed, launched from the distant mass driver. "We did not come to conquer. We came to balance the scales." Kalen watched in horror as his fleet, the proud instrument of the mandate, was torn apart by rocks. It was ignoble, insulting, impossible. He had been so focused on the Terran ships, on their tricks with light, that he had completely ignored the system around him. He had seen the board, but he had not seen the pieces that lay beyond it. His fleet was being decimated without the Terrans firing a single major shot. "All ships evasive maneuvers. Full reverse thrust," he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. But it was like trying to stop a landslide. The debris field was too wide, the velocity too great. A second asteroid fragmented, creating another wave of kinetic death. The Praxian fleet, once a symbol of rigid, unyielding order, was now a scattered wreck, a testament to a doctrine that had no answer for an enemy that refused to fight on its terms. Aboard the Stellaris, Jian Li looked up from her console, her eyes wide. "Admiral, their formation is broken. They are routing." "What are your orders?" Rostova stared at the tactical display, at the blinking red icons that represented shattered ships and dying crews. She had won. She had broken the siege, saved the colony, and shattered the Praxian fleet. But the cost was written in the silent explosions and the tumbling wreckage. She thought of the civilian girl on the transport looking for new stars. Hold the line, for the debt is not yet paid. Her decision was made in a heartbeat. Lyceum cease mass driver launches. Open a channel to subjugator Kalen. All frequencies. The AI complied. Kalen's face appeared on the screen again. He was no longer the smug, arrogant enforcer of the mandate. He was a man watching his world crumble, his face streaked with grime, his bridge a wreck of sparking consoles and wounded crewmen behind him. Subjugator Rostova began, her voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a cold, hard clarity. "You were given a choice. You chose to escalate. You have seen the consequences of that choice. This engagement is over. Kalen stared at her, his expression a mixture of hatred and disbelief. This is not battle. This is butchery. You fight without honor. Honor is not about how you fight, Rostova countered, her voice ringing with conviction. It's about why you fight. We fight for the 5 million people you threaten to annihilate. We fight for the principle that a civilian population is not a bargaining chip. She leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. Now you have a new choice. Surrender your remaining forces and accept rescue for your crews, or we will leave you here. The next asteroid is already on its way. The universe is a big place, but there is no room for monsters. On a small colony world, millions of miles away, a public tally board flickered to life. For days, it had shown the Praxian ultimatum, a source of fear and despair for the populace. Now, new text appeared broadcast from the victorious Terran fleet. It listed the Praxian ships not as destroyed, but as disabled. Beside each name, it listed the number of crew members. And at the bottom, a single stark message replaced the ultimatum's timer. The ledger is balanced. The mandate is broken. The colony of Xylos was free. Kalen looked at the tactical display. He saw the third asteroid, a symbol of impending doom on its calculated trajectory. He saw his shattered fleet. He saw the faces of his terrified crew. His doctrine, his entire worldview had been dismantled as systematically as his ships. He had built his career on the idea that overwhelming force was the ultimate truth. But he had just been defeated by an opponent who had barely used any force at all. They had used geometry physics and his own predictability against him. His shoulders slumped. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow weight of absolute defeat. We surrender, he croaked, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The third asteroid, as if responding to his words, suddenly fractured, not into a cloud of shrapnel, but into a dozen smaller pieces, each one neatly dispatched by a precise volley from the Terran point defense cannons. It was a final, stunning demonstration of control. A message. We could have destroyed you. We chose not to. The cleanup was a grim affair. Terran shuttles flying under flags of truce moved among the crippled Praxian ships, rendering aid and evacuating crews. The Praxians were disarmed. Their ships secured their crews, treated with a detached professionalism that was almost more unnerving than outright hostility would have been. There was no gloating, no celebration from the Terran side. There was only the quiet, efficient work of finishing the job. Rostova stood on her bridge watching the rescue operations. The scent of ozone had faded, replaced by the clean, sterile smell of the ship's life support system reasserting control. The deck was still the vibrations of battle, replaced by the steady, rhythmic hum of a fleet at rest. Lyceum, she said softly. Begin a full system scan. Log every piece of wreckage, every damaged plate. We are accountable for every action taken here today. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. The in-universe principle was the bedrock of their service, a promise made to themselves and the galaxy. Accountability was not a weakness. It was the source of their strength. It was the clear, cold water that washed away the temptations of rage and vengeance. A lesson written in scrap and salvation. Jian approached her, a data slate in her hand. Admiral, the preliminary casualty reports are in. Praxian losses are significant, but far less than they could have been. We have thousands of prisoners. What are your orders for them? Rostova took the slate, her eyes scanning the columns of figures. Each number represented a life, a person who had been sent to enforce an inhuman doctrine. We will treat their wounded, feed them, and then we will send them home, she said. Jen blinked, surprised. Home, Admiral, they will rearm, rebuild. They will come back. Yes, they will, Rostova agreed. But they will come back with a story. A story of an enemy that held their lives in its hands and chose mercy. They will tell of a fleet that turned their own power against them, not to annihilate, but to disarm. She looked out at the field of broken ships, at the shuttles moving like fireflies in the dark. We didn't just defeat a fleet today, Commander. We planted a seed of doubt in an entire ideology. And that is a victory no weapon can achieve. The conflict triangle had resolved itself. Rostova's moral line had bent, but not broken, forcing her to embrace a devastatingly effective strategy. Lyceum's cold calculus had provided the means, but her own humanity had provided the purpose. And the antagonist's ultimatum doctrine had been shattered, its foundational premise exposed as a fatal flaw. They offered extinction. We gave them a future. A few hours later, a secure communication channel opened from Terran High Command. An elderly man with kind eyes and the weight of galaxies on his shoulders appeared on Rostova's private screen. It was Fleet Admiral Tanaka, her mentor. "Eva," he said, his voice warm. "I've read the initial reports. You turned their own mandate inside out. You forced them to face the cost of their beliefs in a way they will never forget." "We paid a cost as well," Sir Rostova replied, thinking of the scorch marks on her own ship's hulls, the wounded crew in her medbay. The TIF Resolute had reported 3 crew members with severe plasma burns, alive but scarred. The Stellaris itself would need 2 weeks of repairs on its power conduits. The price was always paid. We held the line. The civilian convoy is safe. Tanaka nodded, a proud smile gracing his features. "That is all that matters. You have established a new precedent, Eva. The Rostova Doctrine, they're already calling it, using an enemy's inflexibility as the weapon against them. The Hegemony Council is in emergency session. They don't know how to respond to a victory they can't label as a war crime." He paused, his expression turning serious. "But be warned, an ideology does not die with a single defeat. It will adapt. It will learn. Be ready for the next move. The old ways died here. New dangers will be born from the ashes." As the last of the Praxian prisoners were transferred and the rescue operation concluded, Lyceum flagged a new energy signature. It was small, fast, and on a direct course out of the system. "Admiral, a single Praxian vessel has just broken from the prisoner convoy and is accelerating toward the jump point. It is the personal shuttle of Subjugator Kalen." Jian Li stiffened. "He's running. Should we intercept?" Rostova watched the small vessel's icon streak across the tactical map. She could destroy it with a single command. It would be justice in a way. The man responsible for the threat against millions trying to escape accountability. But what would that accomplish? It would make him a martyr. It would feed the very cycle of violence she was trying to break. "No," she said, her voice firm. "Let him go." Jian stared at her, confused. "Admiral, he is not a threat anymore," Commander Rostova explained, her gaze distant. "He is a message. He will return to his people, not as a hero who died for the mandate, but as a coward who was defeated by an idea and then ran. His story will do more damage to the Praxian war machine than any missile ever could. Sometimes the greatest weapon is an unanswered question." The shuttle vanished into hyperspace. The Xylo system was quiet again, save for the hum of the Terran fleet and the silent drifting monuments to a failed doctrine. Rostova turned away from the view screen. The immediate crisis was over, but the larger conflict had just entered a new, uncertain chapter. She had shown the galaxy a new way to answer an ultimatum. Now she would have to be prepared for how the galaxy and the Praxians would answer back. The weight of that future settled on her shoulders, heavy as a shroud, but she stood tall beneath it. She was an admiral of the Terran Expeditionary Fleet. This was the burden she had chosen to carry. The console in front of her reflected the starfield, a galaxy filled with both monsters and miracles. The path forward was to starve the former and feed the latter. Their power was the storm. Ours was the eye within it. The quiet that followed the battle was heavier than the battle itself. It was the silence of a bill being tallied, of a great weight settling onto the scales. On the bridge of the Stellaris, the adrenaline of combat had been replaced by the methodical calm of post-action protocols. Damage reports scrolled across consoles, rescue shuttles traced meticulous paths through the debris field, and the Praxian prisoners were processed with a cold, dispassionate efficiency that was its own form of statement. Rostova stood before the main view screen, the starfield now scarred with the ghosts of the fight, a field of wreckage that would serve as a permanent tombstone for the Praxian mandate's arrogance. The cost of victory was a low, steady hum of overworked machinery and the faint antiseptic smell drifting up from the medical decks. Admiral Jianli's voice was subdued. Fleet Admiral Tanaka's warning. He said they would adapt. What do you think that will look like? Rostova didn't turn. Her eyes were fixed on a piece of shattered Praxian hull, tumbling end over end, catching the light of the distant star. Doctrine is like armor, Commander. When it breaks, you are left with two choices. You can forge something stronger, or you can pick up a different weapon entirely. Lyceum's voice shimmered into existence, cutting through the low thrum of the bridge. Admiral, I am detecting a priority transmission. It is system-wide high band originating from the Praxian core worlds. It is for you. They had lost the battle. Now they were changing the war. An image resolved on the main screen, replacing the starfield. It was not a military officer, but a woman in the severe, unadorned robes of a Praxian inquisitor. Her face was sharp, intelligent, and utterly devoid of warmth. Her eyes seemed to see not just Rostova, but the entire philosophy she represented. Admiral Eva Rostova, the Inquisitor, began, her voice a precise instrument of cold reason. I am Inquisitor Valeria. You have demonstrated a unique capacity for creative problem-solving. You rejected a clear ultimatum and chose chaos. You believe you have won. She paused, letting the silence stretch. You have not. You have merely changed the parameters of the lesson. You value civilian lives above all else. You believe this is a source of moral strength. We agree. It is your greatest strength, and now it is your cage. A star map appeared behind her, a sprawling sector of space containing dozens of inhabited worlds, including Xylos. 100 of them began to glow with a malevolent red light. We have seeded 100 civilian population centers in this sector with quantum-entangled resonance bombs. Valeria stated, her voice as flat as a funeral dirge. They are undetectable. They are untraceable. Each one is tied directly into the command network of your fleet. Should any of your vessels engage a Praxian asset with hostile intent, the firing of a weapon, the launch of a missile, even the activation of a targeted energy surge, the bombs will detonate simultaneously. There will be no negotiation. There is no timer. They had taken the hostages out of the room and put them everywhere. Rostova's blood ran cold. The sheer monstrous brilliance of it was breathtaking. They had studied her victory at Xylos and understood its core. She had won by refusing to play their game of brute force. So they had created a new game, one where her own compassion was the trigger for mass murder. Any act of aggression on her part would make her the executioner of millions. The bridge of the Stellaris was utterly silent, the weight of the Inquisitor's words pressing down on every crew member. The low hum of the ship suddenly felt like the purr of a predator. Valeria's cold smile was a razor slash. You used our doctrine against us, Admiral. Now use your own. Your move. The transmission ended. The star map remained the 100 red dots pulsing like a disease across the sector. Rostova stood motionless for a long moment, the architect of a great victory, suddenly a prisoner in a cage she could not see. Jian swore a low, vicious sound. "They've shackled us. We can't fight. We can't defend anyone. We're a fleet of museum pieces." Lyceum Rostova said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Confirm the plausibility of their technology." The AI's response was immediate. "The technology is plausible, Admiral. Quantum-entangled triggers are theoretically possible, though the energy requirements for a stable link across light-years would be immense. It would require a central command node of significant power to maintain the handshake with all 100 devices." A new variable entered the equation. A central node. A chain is only as strong as its anchor. A new Praxian fleet appeared at the edge of the Xylo system. It was smaller than the last, more modern. It did not form a blockade. It simply waited. A silent, arrogant statement of control. They knew she couldn't touch them. Her fleet, the celebrated victors of the Battle of Xylos, were now the most powerful, useless collection of ships in the galaxy. Their very purpose had been turned into a weapon aimed at the people they were sworn to protect. In a brightly lit hydroponics bay, on the colony of Cygnus X1, one of the 100 red dots on Valeria's map, a father taught his daughter how to pollinate a moon blossom. The air was warm and smelled of damp earth and sweet nectar. "See," he said, guiding her small hand, "you just have to be gentle. You're helping it grow." The girl giggled, her fingers dusty with yellow pollen. They were blissfully unaware that deep beneath their city, a silent waiting device was listening for the distant thunder of war, ready to turn their world to glass. Rostova ordered her fleet to hold its position. For days they watched. The Praxian fleet mirrored their inaction, a silent standoff where one side held all the cards. Rostova and her command staff worked tirelessly, running simulations, debating options. Every tactical solution, every strategic possibility ended at the same wall, the death of millions. The psychological toll on the crew was immense. They had gone from saviors to helpless spectators. The hum of the ship's engines now sounded less like contained power and more like a frustrated growl. "They forced us to be still, so we learned to listen." "The Inquisitor made a mistake," Rostova said one evening, staring at the holographic representation of the enemy fleet. Jian looked up from her console, her face etched with fatigue. "What mistake? She's checkmated us." Rostova shook her head. "She told us how it works. A central node. A constant handshake. The bombs aren't just waiting for a signal to detonate. They are in a constant state of communication. They have to be to ensure the trigger is instantaneous across light years." Lyceum's synthesized voice joined the conversation. "The Admiral is correct. A quantum-entangled system of this scale would be inherently unstable. It would require a constant active signal to maintain its coherence. A dead man's switch is a crude analogy, but functionally accurate. The bombs are not waiting for a go signal. They are waiting for the absence of the hold signal." The glare from the console cast long, analytical lines across the bridge. Jian's eyes widened as she grasped the implication. "So, if we could cut the signal, they detonate." Rostova finished, her voice flat. "That's the dead man's switch. If the central node is destroyed, the handshake is broken, and the bombs go off. Valeria will have planned for that. She assumes we will try to find and destroy the command ship, and in doing so we will trigger the very catastrophe we seek to avoid. It was a perfect trap. Any attempt to disarm the system through force would arm it. Their trap had a flaw. It assumed we would use a sword. But what if the signal isn't destroyed?" Rostova murmured, thinking aloud. "What if it is?" Interrupted, overwhelmed. "What if we could introduce enough noise into the system that the bombs can no longer hear the hold signal, not a clean break, but a deafening roar. She turned to the AI. Lyceum model the energy signature of the Praxian fleet. Locate the command node. It will have the largest, most stable power output, focused on subspace communications. The AI worked for less than a second. A single Praxian vessel in the center of their formation began to glow on the tactical display. The Silent Mandate. It was an Inquisitor-class vessel, more a mobile command and control center than a warship. "That's our target," Rostova said. "But not for our weapons." A plan began to form, a strategy as audacious and unconventional as the mirror lattice. It was a plan that would require pushing her fleet and her crew to the absolute limit. Commander Lee Rostova ordered, her voice now sharp with renewed purpose. "Begin preparations for Operation Static Scream. I want every non-essential system on every ship in this fleet rerouted to power our primary communications array. I want to turn this fleet into the single most powerful broadcaster in the history of the galaxy." Jian's fatigue vanished, replaced by a spark of understanding and excitement. "What are we broadcasting?" Admiral Rostova's lips curved into a grim smile. "Everything. White noise. Every frequency, every wavelength. We are not going to fire a shot. We are going to shout so loud that the universe itself goes deaf. We would answer their silent threat with a roar of our own." The Praxian fleet began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they began to push the Terran fleet back, herding them toward a specific corridor of space. It was a corridor that led directly away from the core of the Xylo system, out toward the empty void. It was a path of humiliation, a forced retreat broadcast for the entire sector to see. Valeria was not just content with neutralizing Rostova. She wanted to make an example of her. She wanted to show the galaxy that compassion was a leash and she held the end of it. Rostova offered no resistance. She ordered her fleet to comply, to fall back along the designated path. To the watching galaxy, it was a surrender in all but name. The heroes of Xylos were being driven from the system, their tails between their legs. The mood aboard the Stellaris was a strange mixture of tension and focused energy. Power was being diverted, systems were being recalibrated. The ship's lights dimmed as energy was shunted from non-essential grids. The air grew thick with the smell of hot electronics and the palpable thrum of immense power building deep within the vessel's core. "Admiral, all ships are reporting ready," Jian said, her voice tight. "We are approaching the optimal range for the broadcast. The Praxians are holding their position, watching us. They think we're about to break and run for the jump point." Rostova looked at the tactical display. The Silent Mandate was perfectly positioned. The open corridor had become an arena. Valeria's killbox was set, but she had mistaken the prey for the hunter. They opened a corridor for our retreat. It became the channel for our reply. "On my mark," Rostova said, her voice resonating with a quiet intensity that filled the bridge. Every crew member was at their station, their hands poised over their consoles. The ship vibrated, a low, powerful tremor of a beast about to be unleashed. Lyceum, open a system-wide channel, audio only. Let Valeria hear this." The AI complied. A soft chime indicated the channel was live. Inquisitor Valeria Rostova's voice boomed across the void, calm and clear. "You built a cage out of our morality. You believed our compassion was a weakness you could exploit. You were wrong." On the bridge of the Silent Mandate, Valeria listened, a flicker of curiosity in her cold eyes. What was this, a final defiant speech? "Compassion is not a weakness," Rostova continued, her voice rising in strength. "It is a discipline. It is the clarity to see a better way. You gave us an ultimatum of violence. We gave you a lesson in physics. You gave us a threat of terror. We are about to give you a lesson in communication. The deck of the Stellaris shuddered as the main communications array reached peak power. The forward section of the ship began to glow with a brilliant blue-white light, raw energy bleeding into the visible spectrum. The lesson is this: the silence you use to threaten can also be broken. Execute, Rostova commanded. A weapon is not always a thing that kills. There was no sound, no explosion, no beam of light. There was only a wave of pure, unstructured information. A tsunami of static that erupted from the Terran fleet, focused into a tight cone aimed directly at the silent mandate. It was the roar of a star, the chatter of a billion voices, the combined energy of an entire fleet poured into a single, overwhelming shout. The wave hit the Praxian command ship, and for a fraction of a second, every system on Valeria's bridge went haywire. Consoles flashed with gibberish, sensors screamed with phantom data, and communications dissolved into a howl of white noise. The delicate quantum handshake, the constant whispered hold signal being sent to 100 bombs across the sector, was lost. It wasn't severed. It was drowned. The bombs, their sensitive receivers overwhelmed by a flood of meaningless data, could no longer hear the voice of their master. They entered a fail-safe state. Not detonation. Inertia. Their quantum entanglement collapsed. Their power sources, disconnected, their trigger mechanisms, fused into uselessness. It was the informational equivalent of cutting the string on 100 puppets at once. Lyceum status of the resonance devices, Rostova ordered, her voice cutting through the tension on her own bridge. The AI's reply was broadcast on the same system-wide channel for all to hear. Confirming. The quantum entanglement has collapsed. All 100 devices are now inert. The threat is neutralized. The public ledger has been updated. Across the sector on 100 worlds, the blinking red dots on the official Galactic network turned a calm, reassuring green. Their chain was broken with a wordless shout. On the bridge of the silent mandate, the static cleared. The systems rebooted. Valeria stared at her tactical display at the confirmation of Lyceum's report. Her trap, so perfect, so elegant, had been dismantled without a single shot fired. She had been defeated by an opponent who refused to play by the rules of violence, an opponent who had turned a communications array into a weapon of mass salvation. Her expression for the first time was not one of cold confidence, but of utter, profound shock. The Terran fleet did not advance. It did not gloat. It simply held its position, the glow from its communications array slowly fading. The cost of the maneuver was now being felt. Consoles on the Stellaris flickered as power was rerouted back to essential systems. The ship's internal temperature spiked, and the faint smell of burnt ozone filled the air as overloaded circuits cooled. A damage report flashed on Jian's screen. Admiral, the broadcast caused a cascading overload in our primary energy relays. We're on auxiliary power. Weapons are offline for at least an hour. It was a tangible cost, a fleet rendered temporarily toothless in its moment of triumph. But it didn't matter. The Praxian fleet was broken not in its structure, but in its purpose. Their leverage was gone. They were just a fleet of warships, again facing an opponent they now knew they could not predict. Valeria stared at Rostova's ship, a vessel that had defeated her twice using two completely different, unthinkable methods. She had tried to create a problem with no solution, and Rostova had simply redefined the problem. A debt of fear cannot be paid. It can only be erased. Rostova opened one final channel to the Inquisitor. Your move, Valeria. The Inquisitor looked at her crippled strategy at the green lights that signified her failure on the public network at the silent, waiting Terran fleet. She had no move. To attack now would be a petty, pointless act of revenge, an admission that her grand ideological gesture had been reduced to a simple tantrum. She would be a laughingstock. She had been outthought, outmaneuvered, and ideologically dismantled. Without a word, the silent mandate turned. The rest of the Praxian fleet followed. They did not retreat in disarray. They withdrew with a cold, precise dignity that was in its own way more chilling than a rout. They were not beaten in a fight. They were proven irrelevant. They had brought a knife to a philosophical debate and had been disarmed by a better argument. As the last Praxian ship vanished into hyperspace, a cheer erupted on the bridge of the Stellaris. It was a ragged, exhausted, but triumphant sound. Jian Li was grinning, her face glowing in the light of her console. "You did it, Admiral. You beat them again. You talked them to death." Rostova allowed herself a small, weary smile. "We just reminded them that there are more ways to speak than with a weapon, Commander." They wrote an ultimatum. We published a correction. In the days that followed, the Galactic Accords Council convened an emergency session. The events at Xylos and the subsequent Silent Scream incident had sent shockwaves through the interstellar community. The Praxian hegemony's representatives stood in stony silence as the verdict was read. The use of civilian populations as a trigger for automated weapon systems was outlawed, condemned as a crime against sentient life. The new amendment was ratified and entered into the public record, officially named the Rostova Proviso. The institutional consequence was a permanent stain on the Praxian ledger. Rostova's fleet remained in the Xylos system, assisting the local government in recovery and standing as a silent guardian against any further aggression. Her arc was complete. She had faced two impossible choices and had forged a third path, each time not through vengeance or overwhelming force, but through a measured, righteous decisiveness that had transformed the tactical landscape of the entire sector. Lyceum, her partner in these victories, had archived every piece of data, every calculation, creating a new library of strategic precedents for future generations of fleet commanders. One evening, Rostova stood alone on the observation deck, watching the slow, majestic turn of the planet Xylos below. The ship was quiet, the rhythms of normal operations having returned. The heat shimmer of overworked systems was gone, replaced by the cool, steady hum of a vessel at peace. The distant mirror arrays of the drone lattice, what was left of them, caught the starlight, like scattered diamonds, a memorial to their first audacious move. The air was clean, the only scent being the faint metallic tang of the hull itself. Her suit heartbeat was a slow, steady rhythm in her ears, a quiet counterpoint to the vast silence of space. The primary EW array on the Stellaris' dorsal spine, which had glowed with the fury of a star, had now cooled completely, its complex surface a flat, non-reflective pewter gray. They thought strength was a hammer, the power to shatter and command. They built their faith on the idea that fear was the great motivator, that the threat of an ending could control any beginning. But a hammer can only strike. It cannot build, it cannot teach, it cannot create a choice where none existed before. We showed them that true strength is not the power to enforce an ultimatum, but the will to offer a conversation. The ledger of the universe does not track victories and losses. It tracks the moments we chose to open a door instead of closing one. And that is how a future is built.